Good day once again and welcome to GH Mix. My name is Kwesi Esonbak. Well, thank you very much for making the time for our show. Today we are going to look into a subject that we have been engaging with for a while now. A while ago, a Nigerian investigative journalist tweeted that the campaign of the Vice President, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, is sort of connected with a certain group in Nigeria. Now, the apologists of the Vice President have come out vehemently denying this. Some of them have challenged the tweet and asked for further proof. Well, here it is. We have on the show today David Hundeyin, and he is going to tell us what exactly he meant when he put out that tweet, among a few other things. Welcome to GH Mix, David, and thank you for making the time.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so David, first of all, let me ask about that tweet. It wasn't even particularly targeted at the Vice President at all. You were talking about your country, Nigeria, and the Vice President seemed to kind of catch a stray bullet, as they would say. Is that the case?
Yes, that is exactly the case. I was making a completely unrelated point about how certain ethnicities and groups in Nigeria do a relatively poor job of communicating and projecting their group interests. And to illustrate the manner to which this failure was occurring, I used the illustration of another group that has been more successful in projecting its interests. And I mentioned in passing that this group, which has as one of its institutions, leading institutions, a think tank known as the Arewa Consultative Forum, is backing a candidate in the 2024 Ghanaian presidential election in the person of Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia. Now, first of all, this is not exactly a secret. It's quite well known, actually. In fact, if you do something as simple as a Google search, you will see on at least one occasion within the past year when several prominent people from this body actually visited Dr. Bawumia in Accra. I mean, it wasn't they didn't come and say we're supporting you politically, because I don't think they're allowed to do that. But the import of that visit wasn't difficult to deduct. In fact, as I said, if you do a Google search, you see faces like Nigeria's past CBN governor, Lamido Sanusi, who visited Dr. Bawumia in Accra. And again, if you are in these circles, again, this is not something which is a secret. This is quite well known. Now, when I made that comment, again, I was making it in a Nigerian context, and I sometimes forget that my tweets also happen to have a Ghanaian readership, have a Ghanaian audience. If that had occurred to me, probably I would have used a different case in point, because a lot of the Ghanaian responses to that tweet have had the very unfortunate idea that somehow that was aimed at disparaging the person of Dr. Bawumia, which is not the case. Ghana is not just my second home, I'll say it's my home, because I actually hold a Ghanaian passport, by the way. And, under the terms of the political asylum which I was granted in Ghana, I'm not even allowed to involve myself in Ghanaian politics. So it certainly wasn't my intention to involve myself in domestic politics of Ghana. I just happen to be making a point, which unfortunately, we sometimes forget how polarizing the political debate is in West Africa, across all our countries in West Africa. And then one group of people jumped on it and then misquoted me and said, oh, the Nigerian investigative journalist says that Mahmoud Bawumia is being sponsored by Islamists, which is not the case. I said nothing of the sort. It's one thing to have backing from a well-recognized and well-known think tank. The Arewa Consultative Forum is known in Nigeria, it's known in Ghana, it's known in the UK, it's known in South Africa. It has its tentacles all over the world. It's a very well-known political lobby group which represents the interests of northern Nigeria, right? So if Dr. Bawumia has support and backing from that political lobby group, that's not exactly breaking news, because again, this is the interests that this group represents happen to intersect in terms of ethnicity and religion, also happen to intersect with the northern Benin, northern Togo, northern Ghana, including the region where Dr. Bamia happens to come from. And it's not just in Ghana that they hold these political interests. They also support candidates in Benin, in Togo, as far afield as Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea. They are known to have a presence there. It's not a secret. This is a very powerful, very, very well known, very well funded lobby group. So um, I wish people would actually read the tweets in context instead of reading what people said, I said, because I've seen like 5 or 6 different iterations of what has been claimed that I said, oh, he's being sponsored by Islamic terrorists or he's linked to Boko Haram. I've seen all sorts of horrible things, which I did not say. So, which is why I agreed to come on this show to just clarify once and for all what it was that was actually said. And I'll just implore people to actually go read that tweet in context and read what it was that I said.
All right. So first of all, let's find out who is this group. Who is the Arewa the Consultative Forum? Maybe you already told us a bit about them, but maybe giving us a broader perspective of what this group is would give us a bit of insight into that whole the idea behind your tweet to say and first of all, they are not an extremist group, are they?
No, they're not. They're a political think tank. That's the best way to describe them. So the word Arewa is a Hausa word that means north. So as you know, Nigeria has 6 geopolitical regions. So there's the southwest, the southeast, the middle belt, the Niger Delta, then the northeast and northwest. The northeast and northwest tend to refer to themselves collectively as the North or Arewa, right? So there's the group that represents the political and social interests of this Arewa region of Nigeria is known as the Arewa Consultative Forum. It's made up of a council of elder statesmen, if you like. Some of them are former political office holders. Some of them are former military officers. Some of them are former high-ranking civil servants, judges, private sector operators, all sorts of people from all over the landscape in northern Nigeria. And the job of the Arewa Consultative Forum is to further the interests of the Arewa as a political collective. So be it in terms of pushing specific candidates within Nigeria's electoral cycle, so be it during presidential or senatorial or governorship elections, and also pushing the narrative of the Arewa in the international space. So, for example, if you recall, in 2014, when the last, this is like 3 elections ago now in Nigeria. So the Nigerian election in 2015, the year before, when the then Secretary of State, John Kerry, visited Nigeria, he actually visited northern Nigeria, right? He basically skipped the whole of southern Nigeria and visited, made a visit where I think the 12 governors of 12 northern states, 9 governors of 9 northern states were present. That was a visit that was facilitated by the Arewa Consultative Forum, because what they do is they engage politically, internationally, with power players internationally. So they are the kind of entity, for example, that would go to Capitol Hill and register as a lobby group for the specific purpose, for example, to try to lobby maybe the U.S. Congress to maybe declare some new terrorist entity, like to proscribe it, because this terror entity is causing problems in Nigeria. Maybe the Nigerian government isn't moving quickly enough to do something about it. So these guys go ahead to pressure the U.S. Senate to prescribe this terror entity. Those sort of political moves, that's what the Arewa Consultative Forum does. So as I said, this is not a secret organization. This is not an Islamist organization. Yes, they happen to be overwhelmingly Muslim, because the northern half of Nigeria is overwhelmingly Muslim. However, it might surprise a lot of people to know the Arewa Consultative Forum is not entirely Muslim. There's a significant minority of Christian members, because the Northern Nigeria also has a significant Christian minority population as well. So it's a lobby group. It's not a religious group. It's not a religious entity. It's a political entity.
Thanks for clearing that up for us. However, I feel like the import of the tweet actually still stands, being that this group is kind of funding or is connected with the vice president's campaign. Is that what your understanding is?
Well, as I said, it's not a secret that they have publicly expressed, as well as behind the scenes, also have some sort of rapport with the Bawumia campaign. I'm pretty sure Bawumia himself wouldn't deny this, because again, a lot of this is on public record. This is not a secret of any description. So if you are in this, if you move in these circles, if you speak to powerful people in northern Nigeria, it's spoken of very casually. It's not a secret. It's not something which is hidden, like there's some sort of secret agenda. It's a regular thing. This is done, as I said, across West Africa, across even parts of Central Africa, where this organization also has a presence. So maybe it's because, as I came to understand later, my use of the word funding might have caused a problem in Ghana, because I believe under the Ghanaian constitution, foreign funding of a candidate in a local election is actually forbidden. So I think that's what caused the issue with the Bawumia campaign, because it seemed as if I was accusing them of committing an electoral crime, right? But I should clarify that, again, as I said, this is not a secret. This is on public record, right? Maybe if I had remembered that the Ghanaian, electoral season is hotting up, and these things are going to be sort of taken into cognizance in the manner that they are, maybe I wouldn't have mentioned that. However, I do stand by what I said. I didn't tell a lie. Maybe for whatever reason, it's considered to be politically embarrassing. I wouldn't know why. I'm not versed in the local politics of Ghana, but it is what it is. So, whoever misquoted me should please go read the tweet again. And whoever feels as if maybe the tweet implicates them in some way, maybe they need to come out and explain what exactly it is that was implicating in that message.
Yeah, but when you say funding, though, or are you saying you didn't use the word funding? And if you did, what exactly did you mean by that?
Well, yeah, funding. So funding doesn't necessarily mean somebody is bringing a wad of dollar bills to put in your pocket, and that means the person has funded you. There are several different ways of offering material support. If you donate a vehicle, it can be said that you're funding a campaign. There are several multiple ways of providing material support to a campaign. Now, I know for a fact that such material support has been offered in several cases, not just in Ghanaian election. It's a thing that such lobby groups do in Nigeria. So again, maybe the political culture of Nigeria is different to that of Ghana, and maybe that's where there's a sort of miscommunication taking place, because the political culture that I am used to is a very sort of it's a very mercantile sort of horse trading kind of culture. So it's very common for such political engagements to take place where there's material support, there's all sorts of things that are offered, up to and including cash. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that there definitely has not been any transfer of cash or something, because again, I wasn't in the room when those things were discussed. I can only speak on what I know. However, what I do know is that there's definitely been political cooperation. There's been some level of material support. To what extent exactly and in what form, again, it's up to the people who are involved to say. That's not my place. Some of what I know, I only know because I happen to be in certain rooms where certain things were said, and it's maybe information I'm not even necessarily even supposed to know. So it's not really my place to come out and, especially because, as I've come to understand now, doing so might have an effect on the internal politics of Ghana, which I have absolutely no intention of getting myself mixed up in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I do understand that, but my thing is that your integrity as a journalist is on the line. And as I have maybe stated once or maybe a few more times, a lot of people in Ghana are, attributing ill motive or even lack of dexterity to your tweet, i.e., trying to actually, bogus your integrity. So that's why I'm trying to get to the heart of the matter. What exactly do you know?
What I would say is people should actually read the tweet, because I think there's a basic misconception that I was specifically, like, somehow I woke up one morning and I decided, right, I want to talk about Mahamudu Bawumia because apparently I have nothing better to do. That's not the case. I was making a completely different point, and I just happened to mention tangentially that, yes, by the way, this political action group, this lobby group, actually has a preferred candidate in Ghanaian election, and that that's the group I was speaking to, you don't have any such organization or any such structure that has or takes care of any such interest locally or internationally. That's the point I was making. So I wasn't even saying it as something negative. I was actually saying it as something positive, that I believe that groups that command such a relatively outsized level of financial power, of economic power, should also have some sort of political leverage to take care of their interests locally and internationally, such as the Arewa Consultative Forum, which, at least in this one instance, which I mentioned tangentially, has interest that it takes care of. So I don't think it says anything about my credibility as a journalist, the fact that I just happened to mention this along the way. I wasn't even speaking in my capacity as a journalist. I wasn't breaking a story. I was making a point. So again, I would really hope that people could actually go and read exactly what it is that I said, and not read what people said I said.
Okay.
That's just the easiest way to get to the bottom of it.
Okay. All right. So now you've mentioned that you don't know how the dynamics of the Ghanaian electoral system is and stuff like that. But then, if we bring it home, as Ghanaians are a bit worried about a statement like that, because people are reading all sorts of meanings into it. I'll give you a scenario. For instance, people believe that the group that you mentioned is going to help rally people to come into Ghana and register to vote for the vice president. So when you say they are funding them, it could be in terms of cash, it could be in terms of support, other types of support like you mentioned. And then with a group like that, with a reach across West Africa, people can read such things into it as well. Do you know exactly what they are doing to help the vice president?
And another major issue is that very important matter of citizenship. And my brother has raised it a couple of times. Our constitution states that before you qualify as a citizen, either parents or grandparents should be a Ghanaian. Birth doesn't necessarily guarantee you Ghanaian citizenship. So those Fulanis who moved from Burkina Faso and other parts of the subcontinent to Ghana and have started their families here, what it means is their children have no nationality because they are neither Ghanaian nor Burkinabes. And that, I must say, is worrying for those of us within the civil society space. Hence the need for the laws to take into consideration some of these very important matters. So thank you so much for the invitation extended to me, and I would like to formally hand this over to His Royal Majesty. I don't know whether I can do it directly. All right.
So again, I will only speak on what I know for a fact, and what I know for a fact is that there is definitely political engagement. There's political cooperation there, and again, as I mentioned earlier, this is actually even on public record, right? They've actually visited him in Accra, They supposedly, prayed for Ghana or something, but it was clearly a political visit. Like these are not hidden; these are in the open. But as far as what exactly, what exact type of material support has been offered, the what I think is appropriate for me to say is that probably it's the Bawumia campaign itself and the people concerned who are best placed to speak on this. And the reason is,
well, they're denying it in the first place, so I'm not sure they're ready to speak about it.
What I know is restricted, or what I'm supposed to know, and what I actually do know. There's a significant gap between the two, and again, that's because I just happen to be in certain places where certain things were mentioned, and in fact, speaking publicly about certain things, might jeopardize certain relationships or put people in trouble for just having said things in my presence, and then I went to my loud mouth and accidentally blabbed something on Twitter, which has, set off some sort of political scandal in Ghana, which was not my intention. So again, the reason I agreed to do this interview was to make it very clear that, first of all, I had absolutely zero intention of antagonizing the Vice President of Ghana and his campaign. I had absolutely no intention of doing that. I think I have enough enemies across the African continent already. I don't need one more. Certainly not in Ghana, which is my home. And then secondly, that people should actually look at the message I was passing across in context. Because when you take out that one tweet and take a screenshot of it and put it up on a website, it looks like I was saying something else altogether. But please look at the whole thread. Look at it in context. So that it's not as if I'm saying, look at what you just said now about the potential for foreigners to cross the border to enter Ghana, register as voters, and basically rig the Ghanaian election. That used to be, if I'm not mistaken, that used to be an accusation that used to be made of people living in the region of Ghana, which was close to Togo. That foreigners from Togo used to cross over into Ghana and vote. And apparently that used to be a huge political issue back in the day. Now, apparently something else, like, it's in the north. They will do that. And, I'm hearing a lot of messaging that, honestly, is making me regret ever putting out that message in the first place. That, okay, I had no idea Ghanaian politics was this intense, because I've always had a picture of Ghana as a very sort of very chilled, very laid back place. I'm learning now that Ghanaian politics and Nigerian politics are actually not that different. So maybe I should have been a bit more circumspect with the things that I said. And if I've accidentally caused offense to anyone, especially just by the fact of being a foreigner who made this comment, because I understand that there's also another political angle to that, because it seems as if a Nigerian is trying to interfere in Ghana's internal politics, which causes another set of problems. I want to make it very clear that's not my intention. And if I've accidentally caused any problems that way, I'm sorry. That was not what I was trying to accomplish at all. It's up to the Bawumia campaign and the ACF themselves to basically clarify what exactly the relationship is between them. As I said, I know there is political synergy between them. I know there have been several meetings. I know these things are not secret. I know there's support that has been offered, if not accepted, definitely offered. I know that, but to go beyond that would essentially be to create problems that don't exist right now. So I think the wisest thing to do would be to leave it there and to say that the people concerned are the people best placed to give certain information. It's certainly not my place.
I hear you. And I want to tell you that people are more worried about the involvement of the ACF than with your tweet, which seems to be actually alerting us to something that's a fact. So you can rest assured that the Ghanaians are not doing that.
However, what the other thing that I will mention is that I also understand why people will be worried potentially about the involvement of an organization which they might perceive as leaning toward a particular region or religion or whatnot. Because I was speaking to someone recently, and he made it clear to me that even though Ghana doesn't have a problem with extremism or with religious terrorism yet, that someday it might get to that point where that might become something for Ghana to be worried about, especially because basically Ghana is like the oasis of stability in a very unstable region, right? And I think Ghanaians are rightfully worried that a wrong political decision could tip the country, the way of Nigeria, and they should absolutely be worried about that, because I think Ghana absolutely does not want to end up going down the route of Nigeria. That would be a problem even for the rest of West Africa, because Ghana is basically, if you can think of anywhere in West Africa that has the current mix of being a relatively politically stable environment with a relatively stable economy, I think right now Ghana is the only place in West Africa which passes on both counts. It used to be Ghana and Senegal, but Senegal now has political instability. The economy isn't doing too well. So it's basically just Ghana. Ghana is the last stronghold of stability in West Africa now. So yes, Ghanaians should be worried about the potential of making a political choice that will tip them, into Nigeria territory. Nobody wants that. I certainly don't want that. Nigeria doesn't want that. It's not in anybody's interest. So I completely understand why they will be worried. But at the same time, I also have to make it clear that these conversations, while they should be had, while they're necessary, I think there are ways of actually obtaining this information, that don't necessarily even have to make, reference to outsiders like me, because just by being an outsider, it creates issues, it creates more issues than are solved. So I think this is a challenge actually to Ghanaian journalists and Ghanaian researchers and investigators, that if there's actually something that they feel like it's in the public interest for people to know, they have an opportunity to go dig it up, to find out if they think something is there.
Yes, you're right about a lot of things that you said about Ghana, but when it comes to the economy, not so much. Ghana is in a very terrible place right now when it comes to the economy. Relative, okay, I hear you. Relative, yeah, that clears it up. So, David, let me ask you, the Vice President's wife, Samira Bawumia, is of Fulani extraction. Now, my read is that the ACF is heavily headed by people from the Fulani extract.
All right.
Do you know if there's any connection there?
So, to be honest, no, I don't. It wouldn't surprise me if there is, but to be honest, I actually don't. The information that I have, which I'll restrict myself to in the interest of being completely transparent, the information that I have only made any mention of Dr. Bawumia himself and the ACF. He made no mention of his wife. And to be fair, based on the sort of the religious leanings, because this is, even though it's a body that has a mix of Christians and Muslims, inevitably, because it's so heavily dominated by Muslims, it tends to be Muslim skewing in terms of its overall goals and its culture. I doubt that the identity of the president's wife would make that much of a difference to this group. In fact, it will be expected. Certainly, most of the members of this group, certainly that I'm familiar with in Nigeria, don't have one wife. They have as many as 4. So if Dr. Bawumia has only one, I don't know how many wives he has. I'm assuming he has only one. If he has only one, then he's probably not even considered to be, the same kind of, to have to necessarily share the same identity that they do. The cultures are slightly different. So again, I would see this more. So instead of people seeing this as, oh, this is one group of people who are reaching out to their people in another country, I don't think that's the case at all. Because even if there is some sort of ethnic relationship, Nigeria and Ghana are very different societies, very, very different. So I think this is more a case of this group basically looking at the options available in every election and simply deciding which candidate it is most comfortable with, which candidate it thinks it can engage the most with in terms of how it wants the relationship between Nigeria and Ghana to be. Because don't forget that this is a group that exerts a lot of influence locally within Nigeria as well. This is a group that, as recently as last year, as recently as this year, actually, because there was the handover this year, the president of Nigeria was somebody who was, who this group had his ear very closely. So this is a group that exerts a lot of influence over the national politics of Nigeria. So it's often the case that this group functions almost like a pseudo government, almost like a shadow government in Nigeria. Like, okay, this is our vision for Nigerian foreign policy, and this is the person who we think we prefer to engage with. So, but that's their perspective. Obviously, it's not up to them to decide who Ghana's president will be. It's up to the Ghanaian people, and Ghana's elections, to the best of my knowledge, are still relatively free and fair. So, regardless of what they choose or don't choose, it's still the Ghanaian people who will determine who becomes the next president next year.
Okay, now so this is where my head is at. If the ACF has influence across the sub-region, and they are offering some type of support to the vice president, be it monetary, be it whatever type of support, they would want something in return. Do you know what that is?
I can't say that I do, but as I just said, it's possible that it's a gambit that, well, if this person becomes president, this person is the person we would prefer to engage with. This is the person who maybe we feel culturally closest to, or speaks something approaching, it speaks our language, so to speak, not in a literal sense, but this person that we can have more of a rapport with. Maybe that's just how they see it. And actually, in even though Southern Nigeria doesn't necessarily have a group like that, because Southern Nigeria is a lot more fragmented than Northern Nigeria, but something similar happens every time there's an election in a neighboring country as well. The intelligentsia across Southern Nigeria are always able to identify that, okay, there is this candidate who is more likely to be closer to what we represent, and we're more comfortable with him. So in Benin, for example, Benin is right next to Nigeria. During the last election, which was between Patrice Talon and I forget the other guy's name, it was, in Lagos and across southern Nigeria, there was a sense that, okay, Patrice Talon is, he's our guy. He is sort of pro-Nigeria. The other guy was very, very fiercely pro-France, sort of very belligerently anti-Nigerian, wants to move closer to France. He wants to make sure, blah, 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 But Patrice Talon, who is the president now, it was kind of understood that this guy is, in fact, he made a comment, a joking comment about Benin being Nigeria's 37th state, which played well with a lot of us, because Nigeria and Benin have a very, very tight economic relationship. The border between the two, I believe, is the busiest border in the whole of West Africa. So something similar happens too. So it's not necessarily the case that there's a quid pro quo that, okay, in return for this support, when you get in there, you're going to give us that. Definitely, I don't think these guys need anything in financial terms or whatever from him. I mean, they are very, very well funded. They are very, 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 very well funded. Money is not their problem. I don't think they need anything from Ghana specifically. I think it's a power play.
Except maybe to get business opportunities and stuff like that, to keep themselves even more, well funded. So, I mean, that shouldn't be far-fetched, don't you think? Maybe their business interests, and like you said, if they are such a political force.
I'm trying very hard not to get ahead of myself, or not to put words in the mouths of people who haven't spoken. So,
I understand that.
I
understand that, but the Ghanaian in me is seeing all sorts of scenarios here. So I hope you pardon that. Now let me ask you again. As laughable as it may sound, some even went to the extent of saying that the former president, John Dramani Mahama, is the one who had contracted you to put out that tweet. Have you met? I see you laughing.
So
Have you met John Mahama? Do you know him at all, or any of his aides for that
the closest
matter?
I've ever been to John Mahama is that my friend Wode Maya has met him in person. That's the closest I've ever been to John
Not
Mahama.
even you,
I've
your
never met him.
friend.
Like, I would love to meet him someday, though. I would like I would love to have the opportunity to have a conversation with him. But no, I think in my entire time in Ghana, I think the most important person I've met in Ghana is probably Wode Maya.
So that's something that should be totally rubbish, you say?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely.
All right. Now let me come back to the tweet for a single moment, because I'm just trying to make sure that Ghanaians are very clear in their heads what you actually meant, and we can put this matter to rest. You did not particularly say, number one, let me do it this way. Number one, the ACF is not an extremist group. Number two, you did not particularly say that they were funding the vice president's campaign, i.e., giving him some money or whatever. However, you are reiterating that they actually did meet and they are actually in support of the vice president's campaign. Am I reading it right?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Okay. Before we go, David, and I want to thank you so much for making the time for us, but you are recently in Zimbabwe, and something very unfortunate happened over there. Can you give us a brief gist what happened over there in Zimbabwe?
Well, so apparently, the fact of holding a Ghanaian passport or Ghanaian travel document, which is supposed to grant visa-free entry into Zimbabwe, doesn't necessarily hold, because apparently the process of getting entry into Zimbabwe, it's arbitrary. The authorities can decide to let you in or not, depending on what side of the bed they woke up on. So in my case, I mean, I saw several people who were on the same flight who didn't even have visas. There were Chinese people, for example, who were able to just walk through. They put some money, in some cases $100 or $300 into the passport, give it to the lady. She scrolls something on the landing card. She gives them their passport and they go through. Maybe my crime was that I didn't withdraw cash when I was coming from Addis Ababa. Maybe that was the mistake that I made, because I assumed, hey, this is a Ghanaian travel document. And I had already called the Zimbabwean embassy in Accra before departing that, is everything in order? Do I need a visa? Do I not need a visa? And the lady said, as long as the airline is happy to recognize your Ghanaian travel document as a Ghanaian passport, it's fine. We're going to let you in. It's not a problem. And then I got there, and then they first asked for money. They asked for $300. I didn't have it on me. And I in fairness, I asked if there was an ATM, because I assumed that, hey, if you can get me to an ATM, I'll give you your money. There's no problem, because I understand how Africa works, right? It's not a perfect place. Bribes will be, I know how it works, but there happened to be no ATM in the arrival area, so that's where the problem originated from. So it then became, okay, you don't have money, so let's see your passport. And I showed them, and they said, oh, but the nationality field in there says Nigerian. I said, yes, but it's a Ghanaian travel document. But it's, yeah, but as long as the nationality is Nigerian, you need a visa. So you're here illegally, and we're not going to let you in. So that was basically it. So then I got locked up in some detention room. And I don't know if you saw on Twitter, I actually uploaded pictures of the walls of that room. And some of the messages that were scrolled on the walls by previous occupants of that room, many of them were by Ghanaians, like full Ghanaian citizens with full Ghanaian passports, who went through the same thing because they didn't pay a bribe, and they basically got ejected from the country. So apparently that's a thing they do in Zimbabwe a lot. But what made my case stand out was that there was some sort of dialogue going on between the Zimbabwean authorities and the Nigerian High Commission regarding potentially how, if they would be willing to hand me over. Now, bear in mind, that would be in violation of international law, the law of refoulement, which means that someone who fled the country as a refugee cannot be returned to that country. And I wasn't traveling with a Nigerian passport anyway, but apparently that conversation was happening. So in the process of that conversation happening, I was just sort of left inside that room, cell, whatever it is, and basically just forgotten for hours, because this happened around like maybe 2:30 local time in the afternoon. And eventually it was around maybe, it was getting toward 9 p.m. that I panicked finally, and I said, okay, I need to hit the nuclear button on this one, because I had called, I had made calls. My friend Wadimaya, he knows a few people in Zimbabwe. He had made calls. Hopewell Chinono, the Zimbabwean journalist, he had made calls too, and nothing was happening. So eventually I decided, okay, my last play here is do a tweet, like an SOS, like, please get me out of here, because I knew that the longer I spend in there, the worse my situation is getting. Because I think I'd figured out by that time that these people probably know who I am. And, I'm probably going to get in trouble because, again, wherever in Africa, it's not technically a democracy, but I mean, not really. So they're probably going to be looking at you. Oh, you're a journalist. Oh, you're a troublemaker. Oh, you're one of those people, because they already have someone like that there, Hopewell. So, okay, you're here, and you are friends with Hopewell as well. So you're here to cause trouble for us. Maybe you're here to do Al Jazeera Gold Mafia episode 5, right? So that's probably what they were thinking. So I knew that I was going to be in trouble. So that's why I put out that tweet that, please help me. I need to get out of here. So, and the tweet worked because they came under international pressure, and CPJ, they wanted to put out a statement with RSF as well. So because of that, that's basically what made them sort of hands off me and pushed me on a plane and basically told me to buzz off. But after I left the country, it became very clear that they knew who I was, because the Minister of Information, the guy called George Charamba, then put out a statement saying that I'm a foreign agent. I'm an agent of Western imperialism, that I'm US sponsored. I'm here. I was there for regime change and whatnot. It was a speaking engagement that took me there, which, I mean, they could have verified it very easily, but they said I was there to carry out regime change apparently. And then the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Information, Nick Mangwana, then put out a statement the following day saying that any journalist coming to Zimbabwe during this election, because this is the election period, I think the election is this month, that any journalist coming to Zimbabwe during the election period shouldn't pretend to be a tourist, but they should get a work visa. And obviously it was making reference to me. So clearly these people thought that I was there to work. They thought I was there to chase a story, which, I mean, I found kind of funny, because if I haven't finished chasing stories in West Africa, what the hell am I doing in Zimbabwe? The furthest I've ever gone in pursuit of a story is Cote d'Ivoire. That's the furthest I've ever gone. My platform is called West Africa Weekly, so my catchment area is the ECOWAS region. Occasionally, it spills over into Cameroon, but that's because Cameroon has a border with Nigeria. I don't go beyond that, So what the hell would I be doing in Zimbabwe if I was looking for a story? When have I ever worked on a story in Zimbabwe before? But apparently, they saw 2 and 2, and then they put them together and got 22, and convinced themselves that I was there to cause trouble for the Mnangagwa administration. So they kicked me out, and they insisted, by the way, that they didn't give me back my passport when I was leaving the country. They actually made the airline give it back to me in Accra. So I had to fly all the way back to Accra, where I don't even live anymore, but they made me fly all the way back to Accra before I could get my passport. And when I was very interestingly, when I was at the airport in Accra and I spoke to a guy in the immigration team there, he said apparently it's a regular thing that happens with Ghanaian passport holders in Zimbabwe, that the country just sends them back for no reason, for absolutely no reason. They're not deported, they're just denied entry, and they're sent back with no explanation, and that the Ghanaian authorities have actually taken note of it, and that it's something which they're actually going to possibly even raise with their Zimbabwean counterparts.
How long were you kept in that cell? How long were you in there?
In total, so this was between around 2 in the afternoon to just after midnight. So roughly 11 hours.
Damn. Did they give you any food or water? Did they give you any comforts at all?
No, none whatsoever. After I made the tweets and then it went viral and whatnot, and it caused a bit of noise, they allowed me go out to use the bathroom once. That was it, because there was nowhere to pee. So that was the only comfort that I had. Apart from that, the one thing I'm very grateful and thankful for is that the airport Wi-Fi was working. I think that's, if that counts as a comfort, that was the one thing. If the Wi-Fi wasn't working, I don't know what would have become of me. I was only able to put out that tweet because the airport Wi-Fi was working. So I guess that has to count for something.
That is very unfortunate. That is really, really, really unfortunate. Now, David, let me ask you about, you mentioned the gold, the Al Jazeera gold story thing there. Are you, or were you involved with that in any way?
I mean, I wish I was, but I wasn't at all.
Okay. All right. We're going to let you go, David. Thank you so much for your time. But one last question. The relation, what do you see as a potential relationship between Ghana and Nigeria in terms of what we have learned today, i.e. that the government of Nigeria, not the government, I'm sorry, that the ACF is actually, you know, pro Mahmoud Bawumia in the event of Mahmoud Bawumia not winning the election. What do you think is going to be the dynamics over there? Not even with the government, because apparently this is not the government, or obviously this is not the government, but the ACF, who are very politically connected. What do you think their mood would be if Mahmoud Bawumia was to lose the election?
So being they are, I would expect that their immediate move will simply be to start finding ways to create connections with whoever actually won the election. These guys are primarily politicians. They're political operators. So they don't strike me as people who put all their eggs in one basket. So if, I mean, I don't know who all the front runners are. I know of Dr. Bawumia. I know of Kennedy Ejapong. I don't know, there might be others, but those are the two that I've been most sort of, that I'm quite familiar with. If either of them were to win the election, I think the ACF would still be quite comfortable because they would have ways, regardless of, you know, of making inroads to that administration. These are, in addition to being politically connected, they're also connected as well. They're powerful business people who are friendly, you know, because, you know, money doesn't really recognize differences. Money recognizes money. So I think regardless, they will be fine. I think their goal ultimately is to build up power and influence for themselves. Primarily, that's what every lobby and political action group does. What that power and influence will then be used to do, I cannot say. And it's not my place to say. It's, you know, but ultimately, I do believe that Ghana is very much an independent country. So regardless of what does or doesn't happen in Nigeria, regardless of who feels or doesn't feel a certain way in Nigeria, it's not really going to make a material difference regarding what happens or doesn't happen in Ghana. There's often this this mistaken impression that when Nigeria sneezes, then West Africa catches a cold. That's not necessarily the case. Maybe when Nigeria sneezes, maybe Benin catches a cold, but Ghana is a lot more. Ghana is not dependent on Nigeria at all. There's a very close.
I disagree on that. I think there's
a very close economic and diplomatic relationship between the two countries, no doubt. But I mean, over the past 3 years, for example, in as much as Ghanaians have complained a lot about the Ghanaian economy and the depreciation of the Ghanaian cedi, there are a lot of economic markers that haven't done so well. I can tell you that Nigeria has performed about 3 or 4 times worse over the same period. So the correlation between Nigeria's economic performance and Ghana's economic performance has not been that great. There has been a significant divergence. In fact, it might surprise you to know, actually, that there was a point I personally was aware of between 2021 and 2022 where at a point Nigerians were actually moving their money from Naira to cedis because the cedi was a stronger store of long-term value than the Naira was, as incredible as that might sound to you. So the two countries, as interlinked and as close as they are still functionally, they function independently of each other. So I think regardless of what Nigeria does, Ghana is going to be just fine. The only thing I'll be worried about if I were a Ghanaian citizen in the long term would be the security situation of Nigeria and the potential spillover impact on Ghana, because I think that's the one thing that Ghana doesn't have the tools to defend itself against. If there were a significant security breakdown in Nigeria and you were to have 3, 4, 5 million refugees from Nigeria coming into the sub-region, that would be a problem. Yes. For Benin, for Togo, for Ghana, for everywhere as far away as
even for little Liberia, when that happened, it was a big problem for the sub-region, and especially for Ghana, not to think of, God forbid, Nigeria. You know.
Yeah. So, I think that's definitely one thing Ghana should be worried about in the long term, because the long-term security situation in Nigeria is actually, it's not improving. So Ghana should definitely be worried about that. But in terms of the short-term political permutations about what happens if Bawumia wins or doesn't win, the ACF is going to be fine regardless. If he wins, good for them. They have an ally in Flagstaff House. If he doesn't win, they will find a way to get an in with somebody who is close to whoever wins. That's what politicians do.
Okay. Now let help us understand before we actually wrap up. Finally, how much influence does the ACF have in Nigerian politics?
A lot. Bear in mind that Nigeria has been an independent country since 1960. So this is Nigeria's 63rd year as an independent country. During that time, the total number of years that Nigeria has spent under the governance of somebody who didn't come from the political formation which is overseen by the ACF comes to, in total, so that's 8 years, then 5 years, so 13 plus. So altogether, just about 15 years out of 63. Right. So the remaining 40, how many years is that? Has been under either, whether it's military or it's civilian, same thing. Someone who comes from the political formation that was overseen or that is affiliated with the ACF, right? So over time, they've built up an incredible amount of sway, political power, as well as economic heft in Nigeria. So I'm going to list them out. So we're talking about right from the start, Ahmadu Bello, then Tafawa Balewa, Yakubu Gowon, Murtala Mohammed, Muhammadu Buhari, Shehu Shagari, Ibrahim Babangida, Sani Abacha, Abdusalam Abubakar, Umar Musa Yar'Adua, and Muhammadu Buhari. That's 11 different heads of states that came from a political formation that they belong to. So that's it. And they are basically the premier political action group or the premier lobby group at the top of that northern political formation. So they are very influential, which is not to say that they have like direct executive power. They don't, but they have a lot of influence. There's nobody that they don't know. You have from their ranks, you have people who have become ambassadors, military generals, cabinet ministers, obviously 11 heads of state, governors, you name it, high-profile entrepreneurs. The richest man in Africa is affiliated with them, if not one of them actually. So it's a very powerful organization. They have an incredible amount of economic and political heft. So if you're certainly in northern Nigeria, if you're trying to attain any sort of political influence, even economic prominence, you kind of have to be okayed by them. They're like the wise old men who determine where everything goes.
Kingmakers, basically. Yeah. So by richest man, you mean Dangote?
Yeah, I was trying not to mention the name, but thanks.
It's a no-brainer, isn't it? Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for bringing clarity to the subject for us. We really do appreciate it. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for having me.
This has been David Hundeyin, Nigerian investigative journalist. I have a few points that I got from that interview, but we will reserve that for another day when we come back to break it down. My name is Kwesi Esuan-Bakun. I come in peace. I come not to please. We will see you next week with another topic. Have a good day. Goodbye.